So in this video, I want us to do a bit of configuration on our database connection pool. Okay, so we will set a few configurations, a few values. So we're going to go here into the DB struct, and we're going to specify a few variables that we can, or the user can, use to fine-tune the operation of the connection pool. So let's create our tweaking variables. We have max open connections. Okay. All right. So how many connections we can have that are in use, plus the ones that are idle. Okay. So we also need to look at max idle connections. Right. How many connections can be idle? And then, of course, we can set the idle time, okay, for these connections. All right, so we're going to use a string for that. Okay, so these three variables, max open connections, max idle connections, and max idle time, we will get these from flags. Okay, so let me come down here. I was going to say environment variables, but you're actually getting them from flags. So let's quickly create our three flags. So the first one will be an integer, of course, in var, and that will be stored in CFG max open connections. All right, and we're going to give it the name db dash max dash open dash conns. All right, and we're going to set it at 25 as the default value. All right, and we're going to have a message such as PostgreSQL max open connections. All right. So let me just copy this. And I'm going to use that for our idle connections. And so I'm going to save that in max idle connections. And I'm going to rename that as db max idle connections. Okay. And we're going to have 25 as well. Okay. And then we will specify the string as being Postgres max idle connections. Okay, so that takes care of our max open connections and our max idle connections. So let's now look at how to deal with the max idle time. Okay, so I'm going to use a string for that. Okay, so let me use this one. Okay. And it's going to be stored in db dot max idle time. Okay, and so of course we're going to give it the name db dash max dash idle dash time. Okay, and the default will actually be a string. Okay, and so that default will be 15 minutes. Okay, and then the message will be PostgreSQL max connection idle time. Okay, so these are our three flags. Okay, so once we have our flags specified, we will then use those flags to actually make the adjustments to our connection pool inside the OpenDB function, since this is where we actually create the connection pool. Okay, so after we have asked for a connection pool, right? If we get to this line 85, it means we do have a connection pool, and so we can now customize it. And so all we need to do is to call the appropriate function that allows us to do that. So DB has a function that's called set max open connections. Okay, and you notice that it requires is an integer, and so that's easy to get. All we have to do is to say cfg dot db dot max open connections. Okay, so likewise we can also set the max idle connections by simply calling the function called set max idle cons. Okay, and so of course it expects an integer, and we have an integer to give it, and that's cfg dot db dot max idle cons. Okay, now dealing with the max idle time is a bit different because it's actually a string, and so when we call the set so db dot set con max idle time, notice that this requires a time. Okay, currently we have a string, but we could get a time duration from that string by doing some conversion. So let's say duration, okay, let's say error, and I will call from the time package a function called parse duration, and all we have to do is provide a string and it returns a time dot duration. And so we do have a string cfg dot db dot max idle time. Okay, and so it will, if successful, convert this into a time duration. So let's check for any errors. So if error not equal to nil, then we know we have a problem, and so we will return nil along with that error. Otherwise, we will call db.setConMaxIdleTime and simply pass it the duration, okay, which we have safely converted. Okay, and so that's the only thing we want to do when it comes to customizing or modifying our connection pool. Keep in mind, these are the three important ones that we tend to tweak, right? The max open connections, the max idle connections, and the max idle time. You will see these later on in terms of how they make the performance of our database change based on what the values are. Okay, so that's it. We have customized our connection pool, and so we will save this, and let's run, start our server just to make sure that it still works. Okay, we didn't break anything. So go run, cmd, pi. Let's just use help to make sure that our flags are there. Yep, we've got all our flags listed. So let's start the server. Okay, server starts. Let me make one change. Let me write a log message to specify that the database connection was actually successful. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I will move back where we actually call. That will be right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually log the success log the successful connection pool. Okay, so I'm just going to simply say logger. I'm going to print f. Actually print line. Print line. Okay, and I'm going to say something like database connection pool established. Okay, and let's try that again. And so now we have the database connection pool established. Okay, and then we have that the server has started, right? Because that comes next. All right, so everything looks good. Let me quickly commit this. Okay. So we updated, or we set the parameters on the connection pool. Okay, so we can say we set 3 parameters on the connection pool. All right, and if you want to be more specific, you can actually list them. Okay, let me quickly push this. All right, so we are finished with this section. So the next thing we want to do in the next video is to now actually go through the process of creating our database table to hold our school data. So we'll do that in the next lesson, and I'll see you in that.